All right, Song of Solomon. Here we go. So, great to see y'all. If anybody went to their classes and talked about it and came up with any questions or anything you want us to deal with, get those to me, and we'll try to answer those as we go along. Song of Solomon, chapter 6. I got to go over here and tell this thing to quit turning off every 2 minutes. So every time I go to say something, I look down there and it's turned off again. Don't want that. All right. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you, Lord, for this time. Thank you for your word that is a lamp to our feet, a light to our path. Lord, thank you for loving us so. And Lord, not leaving us without knowing what to do in every situation. And so, Lord, in the life of Solomon and Shulamite, Lord, you give us instruction as husbands and wives how to live and how not to live, things to do and things not to do. And Lord, we see them here, and we ask you, Lord, that you would give us wisdom, that we might have strong homes, strong families, strong marriages, and we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. So chapter 6, verse 11 through 13. I came down to the walnut grove to see the blossoms of the valley, to see if the vines were budding, if the pomegranates were blooming. Before I knew it, my desire put me among the chariots of my noble people. Come back, Shulamite, come back, that we may look at you. Why are you looking at Shulamite? As you look at the dance of two camps. Okay, what does all that mean? Okay, we'll deal with it. So, we talked last week about the honey dripping out of the honeymoon. We talked last week about the conflict and conflict resolution. This is just a continuation of that. And this is putting the honey back into the honeymoon that's dripped out. We talked about love's frustration. Solomon comes to the room of Shulamite, to her bedchambers, and he calls out to her, wonderfully sweet, beautiful, and she answers back, "Ow, I can't get up. I've washed my feet. I've already put on my robe. I can't take it off." And so then he leaves, and then she decides, "Oh, I do want to see him." So she gets up, and now he's gone. So now there's conflict going on. Let me just say, that's the fact that's going on here in Song of Solomon. It was her fault. Can you get an amen, guys? No. What I wanted to say was, hey, guys, it just happened to be the illustration that's used here, because we have to admit it, guys. Sometimes we're at wrong. I've met a guy one time that made a mistake in his marriage. And, well, I haven't met many, but anyhow, you know, even if you look at this situation, maybe Solomon's been off working and he's been doing all the things he does and involved in everything. And then he comes home and he thinks, well, I'm just going to, he's not spending time with her. He's not paying attention to her. He's not caring for her. He's not, and so, you know, it can go either way. It's just the situation we're dealing with here. Shulamite is the offender, and Solomon's the one offended. And so don't think of it him or her, just who did the offending and who was offended. And understanding how to respond to each other. Love's frustration, then she gets up and tries to find him. And can't, and love's desperation when things just aren't right in the relationship, things aren't going well. There's a struggle. There's a constant pain because the joy is gone. So what we want to deal with is love's restoration. How do we make it right? How do we get things right? And then that's what we need to be concerned with. Getting things right. Shulamite, the offender, goes to Solomon, the offended. Once she realizes she's wrong, and guys, admit it. Sometimes we do wrong, and the Lord, guys or girls, either one, and the Lord tells us that quick, you're wrong. Now, what are we going to do? I'm sorry, honey, I was wrong. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I was wrong. No, we just ignore it, don't we? And then she says something about it, and then we defend it. Now we're defending that we're wrong, and we already have admitted in our mind, convicted of God in our hearts, that we are wrong. But still, God didn't say I had to admit it publicly, And so, hey, when we're wrong, she is wrong, she goes looking for him. Now here's the question. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? How do you want to live your life? Right or happy?
I gave up being right a long time.
Gave up being right a long time ago. Are you happy?
You daggone right.
You absolutely. Absolutely. And
We gotta bring money.
and hey guys, let's just decide that. Isn't that what life's all about? I don't want to live my life miserable. And I don't want to live my life in this constant struggle of trying to prove that I was right about everything. I'd rather live a happy life. I'd rather enjoy life. And you can make your mind up now. You can decide, oh, Jeffrey, don't think I'm not looking at you. Oh, we know come Saturday we're going to tie the knot. But you can decide before you even get married. I don't want to be right. I want to be happy. I want to live a life with love and joy and peace and just the wonder of it all. And I'm telling you, the longer it takes you to decide that, you're just wasting years. You're determined. Did you want to win the argument? Or do you want to have an awesome marriage? Just decide, because if you'll make your minds up, guys and girls both, if you'll decide, I'm more concerned about us having a wonderful marriage than me winning arguments, man, life will be beyond description. And so she comes looking for him, and look what she says in verse 11. She comes to the vineyard. She wants to know, are there blossoms in the vineyard? Is the vineyard producing sweetness? Is there sweetness in the vineyard? Now, throughout this, the vineyard represents their relationship. In chapter 1, she said, I have not taken care of my vineyard. I've had to work with my brothers. I've become tanned, and so I haven't really cared for chapter 1, she hadn't cared for her vineyard. In chapter 2, the vineyard is in bloom, and we've got to kill the little foxes. We've got to kill those things that will come against and threaten our relationship, because it's all about protecting our relationship, guarding our relationship. And so, what can I do to guard the relationship? And then in chapter 4, that wonderful chapter of love making on the honeymoon night, let my love come into his vineyard. Eat of the fruit. It's all about that marriage relationship and the joy and the fullness that God intended. So she now is coming to the vineyard. Her question is there still sweetness in the vineyard? Ask yourself, Is there still sweetness in the vineyard? Are things still blooming? Are there things, or be honest? No. No, there's no sweetness in the vineyard. We don't talk together. We don't spend time together. We don't like each other. I mean, we're married. Yeah, we're married. And I'll do my part because I'm married, but no, the question is there sweetness in the vineyard? Is your relationship what God would have it to be? Are you enjoying each other? Because if the answer to that is no, the only one that's going to do something about it when you realize it is you. And so you can determine. You're going to continue to be hard-headed and stubborn and bowed up, and you're not going to talk or speak or serve or do anything. Or you can determine. You know, you saw the movie Fireproof. How many of you saw Fireproof? And you heard them talk about the love dare. Anybody here go through the love dare? Yeah, y'all did. I can tell you that probably 8 or 9 couples I know of did the love dare. One couple was already separated. And he came to me, and day after day after day, do the love dare. And they're back together today. Awesome marriage, awesome relationship. Do you understand what the love dare is? The love dare is just putting away your anger and your bitterness and your stubborn right to be right and serving the other person. And throughout the love dare, you're serving them. You're putting them first. You're thinking about them. And it's agape type love because you don't expect anything in return. No, you're just serving them. Is there still sweetness in the marriage? Is there still things in bloom? She comes down to him. She is the one who did the offending. She is wrong. But look what happens, verse 12. She came to see, is there any hope? Is there any chance in our relationship? I've blown it. I was wrong. Verse 12, before I knew it, my desire. Now, who do you think her desire is? Solomon. Put me in his chariot. He is the king. He is the wisest, wealthiest king the world had ever known at that time. There is none like him. Putting her in his chariot is like putting her on Air Force One. Putting her in his chariot is a place of favor. Not many will ride in his chariot. Oh, by the way, here's just a little sub-point. You remember up there when he said there are 60 queens and 80 concubines, but you're the fairest of them all? And so it really bothers a lot of people because, you know, Solomon's going to end up with 300 and 700 wives and concubines. And you think, oh, yeah, this is his first love? Yeah, right. He's going to inherit his daddy's harem. That doesn't mean he will ever sleep with any of them or have sex with any of them or favor any of them. It's just part of his inheritance when he takes the throne. Few will ever ride in his chariot. Few will ever be so favored. She comes to him, and before she opens her mouth, he sweeps her up into his chariot, places her in a place of favor, places her publicly for everybody to see. You'd have thought he'd have said, "Stop the chariot. You there. Now, listen to me. I got a few things to tell you. Now, I want you to know you're not the only woman in the world." He didn't scold her. "Well, let me tell you what you did wrong. Here's what you did." He didn't correct her. "Well, now, here's the way it's going to be. Now, to make things right," he didn't punish her. Matter of fact, you remember, God did the correcting when she was out and came across the guards and they beat her. That's a conviction of God. That's what that represents. You don't have to correct each other when they've wronged you. Just pray and let God do the correcting. And so he doesn't scold her or correct her or rebuke her, but rather immediately he restores her by his side. He lifts her up and places her in the chariot. He forgives. He forgets. He forfeits his right to revenge. That's what we hang on to. I mean, I've got a right. I mean, after all what you did. I mean, I've got something coming to me. I mean, let's just be straight about it. No, he forgave her. He forgot it. And he forfeited the right to collect interest off of her mistakes. Make sure that we're not holding on to things and collecting interest off of somebody else's mistakes. Immediately returns her. He is yielding his right to get back at her. He's yielding his right to tell her she's wrong. She is. But see, he's decided he don't want to win the argument. He don't want to be right. He wants to be happy. It's a decision you can make. Is there still sweetness in the vineyard? Do y'all still talk? Do you enjoy being together? Do you like each other? When I say that Tina's my best friend, do you know how rare that is in marriages? Do you know how damaging, if you're going to kill little foxes, there's a few you need to start shooting right off the bat. When you've got best friends, when you find yourself talking to somebody else about things you don't talk to your husband about, talking to them more than you talk to your husband, when you have reservation to talk to your husband or your wife about things, but you have no reservation to talk to this person or that person, you understand there's a fox that needs to be put to death. You need to guard the fact your husband, your wife ought to be your best friend. There's nobody else you want to talk to. I say to couples in every wedding, I'll say it Saturday. When couples share a sorrow, the sorrows are halved. When they share a joy, the joys are doubled. When something great happens, there's nobody I want to tell better than Tina. Nobody. Because she's going to rejoice with me. Even if it means nothing for her. She's just going to be happy for me. And I'm with her. Is there sweetness left in the vineyard? Is there a friendship there? The young women cry out, come back, Shulamite. Remember, I told you before, Shulamite is not her name. Shulamite is the feminine derivative of Solomon. And so, What they're simply saying is she was a perfect mate for him. They were helpmates. They went together. Paul and Paula. You know, they just fit like Pat and Pat. And so that's the way it ought to be. Just your perfect counterpart. Where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. Where love did abound, forgiveness did much more abound. Forgiving, forgetting, letting go. Just something you need to decide to do. I share this all the time. I've never heard the concept from anybody else, and so the Lord gave it to me, so I just keep sharing it. But if you're going to forgive like Christ forgave, then you've got to be wounded by those you deeply care about to the very pit of your being. And now you have an opportunity to forgive like Christ forgave. Well, let me tell you who that is. If that's not your husband and wife, I don't know anybody that ought to be any closer. And if we can't forgive each other, then who can we forgive? Where love abounds, forgiveness abounds. Because here's a fact. We're going to wrong each other. We're going to step on somebody's toes. We're going to do something that bothers them. We need to learn to forgive and decide, I want to be happy. I don't care about being right. I don't care about winning the argument. I'm more concerned about an awesome marriage. So the young women cry out, come back, come back. And in the same verse, Solomon responds. You think Shulamite turn around and say something to him, but no, Solomon responds. Why are you looking at Shulamite as you look at the dance of two camps? He put her in his chariot and they are headed to the honeymoon suite. Mountain memories. Yeah, that's that bed and breakfast up over Lake Hiawassee in North Georgia. Yes, sirree. That's where they're headed. He's restored her to her place, and they're going to dance, so to speak. You know, she's going to dance before him. They're going to dance together. He says, why do you stare at her? You see, people don't expect you to love and forgive. People expect you to be like everybody else. To get even. Make sure they know you're right. Let me say again that, particularly this part right here, just give credit to Tommy Nelson and the things he did. I used primarily Ron Phillips and then Tommy Nelson, but most of it's just God's Word. But when there's conflict, don't react, resolve to solve the problem. You want to reconcile. Don't let this divide go on and on and on and drive a greater wedge. Love is the offender says, I'm sorry. The offended says, I forgive you. And you live it. And not just say it. It's all for the marriage. Now, some things to never do. So now we're just going to talk about some practical things. We're going to try to get through them here quick. Things never to do when you're in conflict. Some of these things, I mean, if you went out and a waiter treated you like that, you'd write that restaurant off and never go back. You know, if a supposed friend did it, they'd not be your friend. So some things not to do when you're in conflict. Don't raise your voice. Screaming and hollering at each other. Tommy Nelson tells about when his wife was in the dressing room and she was using the hairdryer and she was blowing the hairdryer and she was yelling at him over the hairdryer and he was yelling at her over the hairdryer, and they weren't angry, they were just talking over the hair. And the kid came in and said, fighting, fighting, fighting. That's all you do is fight, fight, fight. All he heard was loud voices. Yeah. You know, lions roar. It's animalistic. Don't scream at each other. I've heard couples out in public screaming at each other. You know, it just, don't raise your voice. Don't embarrass somebody in public. Again, you know, there are some people who don't want to fight in public. I'm one of them. I mean, if you're upset at me, tell me later. You know, don't tell me while I'm standing on the pulpit. You know, well, let me tell you. Tell me later. You know, don't embarrass people. Some people love taking advantage of a crowd to embarrass their mate. Don't quarrel in front of the kids. And let me add an addendum to this. I mean, don't quarrel in front of the kids. I mean, kids are growing up without. I mean, do you understand the pictures that are on television and everything else? Kids don't have a clue what marriage and love and family is all about. You quarrel in front of the kids? Here's a little Paxton addendum. Be affectionate in front of the kids. Teach your kids how to love each other. Now, I see you laughing and all. Come on. But listen, my daughter said to me yesterday, PG-13, and she's 30-some years old. But her daddy loves her mama. There ain't no doubt about that. And I've heard that ever since they were old enough to know PG-13 meant not for kids. You know, we're not talking about being embarrassingly affectionate, but you ought to teach your kids that you love each other. They see you kiss. They see you hold hands. They see that affection between you. So kids learn to do that. Don't use kids as a pawn in your fight. Now, honey, you know Daddy did that. Tell Daddy he did that, won't you? Tell him, Daddy, you did that. Listen, your own child's going to tell him. Tell Daddy you did. Don't use your kids in a fight. Don't make them choose one side or the other of a fight. Never talk outside. I mentioned it a little bit a while ago when talking about who's your best friend. Don't talk about your marriage in a negative way at work, at church, at school, when you're with your circle, whatever circle that is, golf or tennis or quilting bee or shopping, whatever that is. Yeah, I'm talking Pigeon Forge, ladies. So, and hey, listen. Don't talk about your mate to other people. You say, well, it's my friend and they're concerned. It's a prayer request. No, they're sharing that prayer request all over town, and the more they share it, the bigger it gets. And so, just don't talk outside. You all ought to have a trust and a pact between each other. Never use sex as a persuasion in an argument. I'll never forget a friend of mine in Texas, Jerry Hagan, was a state trooper. And he kept telling his wife, you've got to wear your seatbelt. She had this little yellow Volkswagen. She wouldn't wear that seatbelt. She was a nurse. And so she went driving across the square in Cooper, Texas, and he pulled her over and wrote her a ticket. Well, about 2 nights later, they were somewhere, and somebody said something about the ticket, and she was ready for it. She pulled out this little skimpy teddy, and she says, well, let me show you what that ticket cost him. Might have cost me $60, but here's what it cost him. Don't use sex as leverage in winning your argument. Well, you're going to cut somebody off, or you're going to, never touch in anger. I teach parents, you're supposed to spank your child. You're supposed to use a rod. For us, our kids, they had a paddle. We called it the Board of Education. We applied it to the seat of learning quite often. But never use your hand to correct a child. You swat that child with their hand. When they're standing there by the road and you see a car is suddenly swerved over and it's coming too close, and you reach out real quick to grab them, and all they see is a quick hand coming, thinking they're about to get smacked for something, they jump in front of the car. They ought to see that hand always as love and care. That's why God says, use a paddle. Don't let them go without discipline, but don't do it with your hand. Use a paddle. I tell the story how our Board of Education came up missing. We found it 2 weeks later stuffed in the bed springs of one young son's bed, and we only had one son. But anyhow, because the paddle, his anger was toward the paddle, never toward us. Because that was the education. Well, listen, same thing. Your hand ought to be used for nothing in your marriage but love and affection. And God forbid you would ever touch, pinch, twist, grab, squeeze, whatever, in anger. You know what I mean? My mama could pinch you to the bone. You know what I mean? She could grab a piece of flesh anywhere and just pinch you. I don't care who you were. Rambo would have curled up right there. He'd have begged forgiveness. Don't touch in anger. Don't call names. I've heard couples, they talk to each other like dogs. Don't do that. The wounds that are left, you think, well, it's just name calling. They'll get over it. They know it doesn't mean anything. It does. I had my street ministry in downtown Bristol years ago, and we'd seen this comedian on television, and he kept saying, bounce off, clown. For some reason, it was funny. And so, guys at the street ministry, it was like, forget about it or something. It's just a saying you put on there, on the end of whatever. And it's like, bounce off, clown. And one of the guys came to me one day and he said, Brother Don, I don't think we ought to be saying that. It sounds like we really don't care about each other. And some of the guys coming in here may think that we're really running each other down. What you say is very important. You want to lift your mate up. You want to love them, edify them. You want to praise them, and let the words of your mouth be words of praise. I mentioned it before, but don't get historical. If you're going to forgive, forget, and forfeit the right to bring it up again. Or you know what? No. Don't stomp out and slam the door. I think I already told you about that in the little truck and turn into the right. And we've all been there. You'll never get anything solved when you stomp out. If you do, come to the church. I found out real quick, you get over it in a hurry if you drive to the church. You're mad, and you can't fume much when you get to the church. At least I couldn't. Don't freeze the other one out. You know what I mean by freeze out? I'm just not talking about it. They just walk by you. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole house is like, the kids are like walking on eggshells. Because, this one or that one isn't speaking to the other one. Freezing them. Talk about it. Don't use the in-laws. They are just made for it, though. They are perfect. I can just say, oh, you're just like your mother. You're just like your daddy. Don't use the in-laws. You know what I mean? Yeah, Jeffrey. I saw that. And, yeah. It drives a wedge you don't want to drive. Even though she knows her daddy is wrong this time. And he needs to get his nose out of your business. Don't tell her that. Because she still loves her daddy. And now you're driving a wedge and she's having to choose. Don't talk about the in-laws. Never try to reason away pain. Well, Tina, I can tell you hurt. But let me tell you why you hurt. Because you see, here's what you did. And if you'll just stop and think about it, you'll realize you're not hurt at all. If she's hurt, I'm wrong. Period. Because my desire is to never hurt that woman. To never hurt her. Tommy Nelson tells of a widow who stood by the casket of a man, and he had just preached the funeral, and she said to Tommy, 60 years we were married, and this man never once hurt me over anything. Never once did he hurt me. So if she's hurt, I'm wrong, because I don't want to hurt her. No, and so I don't want to try to reason away her hurt. If she's hurt, I want to say, I'm sorry. You were in the right. No, I don't want to be right. I want to be happy, and I don't want to hurt her. And I want to heal the hurt. I don't want to open it up so we can study why she's hurt so much and make the pain all that much worse. You understand what I'm saying? Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Make up and kiss. Don't go to bed angry. Listen to me. Make a vow. Sleep together. Oh, we have separate bedrooms. No, get over that. I tell you. Make a vow. You're not going to bed angry. You're going to. And let me tell you something. Guys, I say this all the time. This is another just thrown in for free, but you ought to pray with your wife. You're the priest of the house. Well, she's the spiritual one. I know, you big pagan, but still, God holds you as the priest of the house. You ought to pray with your wife every day. You can't fuss with somebody you prayed with very easy. I'm not talking about, well, we got to pray, and so clear away a space. It's going to settle. We need time. No. For Tina and I, it's just cuddle up together and pray for each other. Sometimes 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depends on how long before she goes back to sleep. But anyway. No. Sometimes 7 and 10 minutes. It just depends. But still, it's just that cuddling up and And don't get down on your knees to pray. I mean, as soon as you do, your ankle starts hurting, your hips hurting. You can't think of anything but I'm in pain. And, just cuddle up. And so, but pray with each other. We talked about don't get historical. Don't reverse the argument. You did this. Well, let me tell you what you did. It's just kind of the opposite of what you did. And don't fail to listen. The worst words I ever heard in my life early on in the marriage, and I'm talking several years into it, we need to talk. Stab me in the heart. Gut me, hon. We need to talk. I don't want to talk. I'm done talking. We need to talk. You need to listen. And as one wife said, honey, I'm listening, he said. She said, no, I want you to listen with your face. So it's not listening over TV and listening with the remote and listening. No, I want you to listen with your face. Look at me. You need to do that. I mean,
every woman in here giggling.
Cause every man in here, we know it's true, don't we, guys? We don't want to talk. We need to talk. Hey, learn to spend time together. Learn to love each other. When you realize you're doing any one of these things, change. Just stop it. There's a crazy scene years ago with Bob Newhart, and this person comes in and they have all these phobias, and he's a counselor, and his advice was, stop it. Just stop it. Well, here's my advice to you. If you're doing any of these, just stop it. Quit doing it. Why? I don't want to be right. I want to be happy. I don't want to win an argument. I want an awesome marriage. All right? Okay, we'll pick it up next Sunday. Hey, back to the honeymoon suite. PG-13, so